Yes. Hey, Sue. Now I can see you. I couldn't see you before.
Rachel, I'm going to sign out and come back in. I'm having a problem.
Okay.
Okay. Everybody's early today.
So what's the rule for online Zoom teachers? I know like in college, if it was like a art, like a teacher's assistant, you had like 15 minutes and you could leave, and a full professor was like half hour, then you could leave. Like, what is it for Zoom meetings?
Actually, our rule was 5 minutes for teaching assistant and 15 minutes for a professor. So
Okay, sure.
we didn't wait that long.
Nice.
It's not 5:30 yet. We're early. Okay.
Well, good. I'm going to grab some water. I'll be back.
Fred, so we have no class next week, and then
No
we're back.
class. Yeah, then we're back the next Tuesday.
Will you tell us what we're going to be reading?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Like let me get that. September.
Fred, are you in communication
Mhm.
with Rabbi Marco?
It's funny you should ask that. Rabbi Marco was in Greenville this past weekend.
Oh, really?
Yeah, his wife's family lives here, and and her mother was having a birthday, so they spent a few days in Greenville, and he was with us at Saturday morning services last
Oh,
Saturday.
that's marvelous.
Yeah, yeah.
How does he like the West Coast?
He really doesn't. He left his job there.
Really?
Apparently, yeah, there was a variety of reasons. Apparently, they didn't follow through on what they promised as far as salary and a lot of other things. He felt they weren't honest with him, when he signed up. And so, also, it's a very big congregation. It's a whole lot more stressful than, what he was used to in Greenville.
Right.
So, yeah. So he's not sure what he's going to do now. He's sort of freelancing, filling in at various places, places that need a rabbi for the holidays or whatever. Um, so I'm not sure what his future is going to be.
Isn't there
I'm
like
sure he's sorry he left Greenville.
I suspect he probably is. I think he would have been probably happy if he stayed in Greenville. Yeah.
isn't there a lack of conservative rabbis in general right now?
There's a lack of rabbis in general,
Yeah.
you know, particularly among small congregations. It's often very hard for a small congregation to get a rabbi. So you have people who are sort of, freelancing, going from one place to another um, and doing life cycle events, this sort of thing. Um, and also, unfortunately, there are a lot of pretty awful people who are, who can get jobs as rabbis because the demand is so great. And Beth Israel's had their share of them too.
Got
No,
it back
uh,
in the
okay.
old days where the rabbis just did that on the side and they really held the job during the day.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the rabbis who wrote the Talmud, the ones we talk about, the rabbis who created Judaism, back in the Greco-Roman period, yeah, most of them had day jobs. They weren't clergy in the sense that we think of rabbis now. In fact, I talked to Rabbi Marco about that once. Said, why are we paying you? We should. And he said, the job has changed. These guys were religious scholars. The job now really is a pastoral job, more than a scholarly job. You know, I've never heard of a rabbi being fired because he wasn't a good enough a Torah scholar. It's always something like I was in the hospital and he didn't come to see me, or he messed up my daughter's wedding, or something like that.
I
It's
mean,
not
he
something
was
that has nothing to
an
do with being a
excellent
Torah scholar.
woodworker.
Anyway, speaking of
He
scholars, we ought to get
make
started.
good money
So,
being a cabinet maker on the side.
with that he could do that also. He did that for a number of years. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, today we're reading further into Deuteronomy, and we're on chapter 9. And probably the simplest way to do it, it's divided up into 7 aliyahs, 7 readings during the service. So we can just take them one at a time. And the first section is from verse 4 through verse 10. So, so if somebody wants to read that.
Sure. Do not say in your heart when the Lord your God drives them back before you, saying, through my merit did the Lord bring me to take hold of this land, and through the wickedness of these nations is the Lord dispossessing them before you. Not through your merit, nor through your heart's righteousness do you come to take hold of their land, but through the wickedness of these nations is the Lord your God dispossessing them before you, and in order to fulfill the word that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And you shall know that not through your merit is the Lord your God giving you this goodly land to take hold of it, for you are a stiff-necked people. Remember, do not forget that you infuriated the Lord your God in the wilderness from the very day you came out of the land of Egypt until you came to this place. You have been rebellious against the Lord. And in Horeb you infuriated the Lord, and the Lord was incensed with you enough to destroy you. When I went up the mountain to take the stone tablets, the tablets of the covenant that the Lord sealed with you, and I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. No bread did I eat, nor water did I drink. And the Lord gave me the 2 stone tablets, written with the finger of God, and on them all the words that the Lord spoke with you from the midst of the fire on the day of the assembly.
So, so this is really kind of starting. What he's telling them is, you weren't chosen for this land because, you have any special merits, not because of your righteousness that I'm giving you this land, but the people who I'm throwing out of it, on your behalf are worse. It kind of brings back the question that the rabbis, kicked around for a long time. Why were the Jews the chosen people? What virtue did the Jews have? That made him choose them. Um, and basically, uh, one theory was that there's nothing really that special about the Jewish people. The only person who was really special was Abraham. God saw something really special in Abraham, and so he promised this to. So he made this covenant that would not only include Abraham but all his descendants. However bad they turned out to be. And this comes up over and over again. Because of the promise that I made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. No matter how much you sin, no matter how much you rebel, I hold to the covenant because it's my promise to Abraham. Which doesn't say much for you, but he also brings up a metaphor in this, the idea when he calls them a stiff-necked people, which is kind of a favorite phrase that the Bible likes to use. You see it over and over again in the prophets, and it's really kind of an agricultural metaphor. If you have a team of oxen or horses or mules, and they won't bow their heads so you can put a yoke on them, you can't do anything useful with them. And so this is really where the metaphor comes from. Um, the other thing is the business about the 40 days and 40 nights. And here's where you really have to wonder whether 40 is a real number or not, or just means a lot of days. you know, you you can conceivably go for 40 days with no food. I mean, that's kind of pushing the limits, but they're all hunger strikes that have lasted for that long. But you can't really, it's really kind of physiologically impossible to go 40 days without water. Probably the biggest practitioner of hunger strikes was Mahatma Gandhi. He used to do this frequently, when he led protests against the British in India. And he would often go for several weeks not eating anything, but even he would sip some water and fruit juice every day, just because he had to stay alive. And so the 40 days and 40 nights, unless you again believe in miracles, the 40 days and 40 nights is really not possible. So you have to wonder, either it's a miracle or else 40 is not really 40. It's just a word for a lot of days. We don't know how long it was. Um, yeah, the next reading is really kind of shorter. It goes from verse 11 through verse 14, just 3 verses. Somebody wants to read that.
I'll go ahead. At the end of those 40 days and 40 nights, the Lord gave me 2 tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant. And the Lord said to me, hurry, go down from here at once, for the people whom you brought out of Egypt have acted wickedly. They have seemed quick to stray from the path that I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten image. The Lord further said to me, I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Let me alone, and I will destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven, and I will make you a nation far more numerous than they.
And again, this is sort of a repeat. We had this before in Exodus. Deuteronomy is just repeating the story from Exodus. Um, the other odd thing, though, is he's coming back with the 2 tablets of stone. But why did that take 40 days and 40 nights? The Orthodox tradition is that Moses got the entire Torah on Mount Sinai, but there's no mention of him carrying a Torah scroll back with him. Just those two tablets. So you either have to assume that he had 40 days and 40 nights to memorize everything and then wrote it down later. And this is why we refer to these books as the 5 books of Moses, because there's an old tradition that Moses basically wrote the whole thing. Well, that really doesn't make much sense because it includes his death. But you wonder what went on over the 40 days he was up there. You don't need that to make 2 tablets. Okay. And then it continues. The third reading is verses 15 through 21. Someone wants to read that.
I can go.
Okay.
And I turned and came down from the mountain burning in fire, and the 2 tablets, is that right? And the 2 tablets of the
Yeah.
covenant in my 2 hands. And I saw, and look, you offended against the Lord your God. You made you a molten calf. You swerved quickly from the way that the Lord charged you. And I seized the 2 tablets and flung them from my 2 hands and smashed them before your eyes. And I threw myself before the Lord as at first, 40 days and 40 nights. No bread did I eat, nor water did I drink, for all your offense which you committed, as you had offended, to do what was evil in the eyes of the Lord, to anger him. For I was terrified of the blazing wrath with which the Lord was furious enough with you to destroy you. And the Lord listened to me that time as well. And the Lord was greatly enough incensed with Aaron to destroy him. And I interceded in behalf of Aaron too at that time. And your offense that you made, the calf, I had taken and burned it in the fire and crushed it, grinding it well, till it was fine into dust. And I had flung its dust into the wadi that came down from the mountain.
Here again, this was something we read previously in Exodus. He's really repeating this. But now, basically, apparently he gets so angry that he smashes the tablets and then turns around and goes back up the mountain for another 40 days and nights of not eating or drinking anything, which would mean that he did not eat or drink anything for 80 days in a row. which is really kind of pushing it. Unless you figure that he smashed the tablets, took time to grab some food, and then went back up for another 40 days or nights. He also, though, Deuteronomy often adds extra details that you don't find in Exodus, because here he says he interceded for Aaron, his brother. And that's not in the Exodus story. That's something the Deuteronomy adds that it wasn't in the original story. But it also brings up something about Moses. Here you have Moses going back and forth, and he really is serving as a go-between between God and his people. He intercedes with God. He tries to turn God's anger away, from excuse me. Sorry. Um, And this really goes against a Jewish tradition in a way. The rabbis of the Greco-Roman period later said that Moses was the only person who ever did this. They said he was the only person who actually could talk to God directly like that and actually, in a way, negotiate with him for his people. God spoke to the prophets, but they didn't have that kind of role that Moses did. And really, it was one of the reasons that Judaism passed on the Christian idea. The idea of Jesus as being someone who was an intermediary, between people and God. It really went against rabbinic tradition. They didn't believe any human being could ever have that kind of status. And it really caused a huge disruption in Jewish life later on, because in the 18th century, when the Hasidic movement began in Eastern Europe. And the Hasidic groups, they believe that their rabbis are not ordinary rabbis. They're what they call tzaddik. They're holy men. They're the equivalent of Christian saints. And they really believe that their rabbis actually are a step closer to God than ordinary Jews. And they can really intercede with God, for their people. And this again ran directly against centuries of rabbinic tradition that no Jew, no matter how pious or how learned he is, ever has that kind of stature. And which is one of the reasons why the Hasidim originally were denounced by the rest of Orthodox Jews. That was considered a really heretical teaching. And the Hasidim really today are the only ones who still hold on to this idea. You have a Lubavitcher who said who really believe her last Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, was the Messiah. That's and it's something that's peculiar to Hasidism and other even ultra-Orthodox Jews who are non-Hasidic, don't believe that. That they respect their rabbis. Often they respect them in a way that often conservative and Reform Jews don't. But nobody believes that their rabbis are saints, the way the Hasidic Rebbes are. So this really was a break with Jewish tradition. The old tradition was only Moses ever had that status, and no one would ever have that status again. And then the fourth reading goes from verse 22 to verse 29. Someone wants to take that.
Yeah, I'll get it. Give me 1 second. Okay, 22 through 29. And in Taberah, in Massa, and in the other name, you were provoking the Lord, and when the Lord said to you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, Barnea, okay, go up and possess the land that I gave you. Then you rebelled against the word of the Lord your God. You did not believe him, and you did not hearken to his voice. You have been rebels against the Lord from the day that I knew you. I threw myself down before the Lord for 40 days and the 40 nights that I threw myself down, for the Lord had intended to destroy you. And page turn. I prayed to the Lord and said, my Lord, Hashem Elohim, do not destroy your people and your heritage that you redeemed in your greatness, that you took out of Egypt with a strong hand. Remember for the sake of your servants, for Abraham, for Isaac, and for Jacob, do not turn to the stubbornness of this people and to its wickedness and to its sin, lest the land that you took, the land which you took us out will say, for lack of the Lord's ability to bring them to the land of which he spoke to them, and because of his hatred of them, did he take them out to let them die in the wilderness. Yet they are your people and your heritage, whom you took out with your great strength and your outstretched arm.
So, here's Moses really interceding with God for his people. The places he mentioned right at the beginning, the first one was Massa, and this was the first place they came to right after they crossed the sea in the beginning of the Exodus story. And that's where they were complaining because they didn't have any water. And Moses, pulled off the miracle and the rock gave water. The next one is Kivrot Hata'ava. It's difficult even in the Hebrew. And this is where they were complaining that they were tired of manna. God was feeding them with manna, and they were bored. And we want real meat. So he sent all these quails into the camp. They all ate quails till they were really sick of it. And then, of course, the third time is Kadesh Barnea, and this is the place from which Moses sent the 12 spies. And 10 of them come back saying, it's a great country, but we can't do this. This was all a mistake. Let's go back to Egypt. So then they tacked on the 38 extra years till that generation, dies off in the desert. But it's interesting, the two arguments Moses makes, and they're the same arguments he made back in Exodus. Number one is you promised the patriarchs, never mind this people, they may not be worth it, but you made this promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you said it applies to their descendants. So, you made the covenant, you're stuck with it. The other is, which is really kind of strange when you look at it, he's really appealing to God's vanity. He's really saying, look, they're going to say he brought these people out of Egypt to take them to the promised land, and he couldn't do it. He gave up on them before he completed the project. What kind of God is it that can't do what he sets out to do? So, so Moses again appeals to God's vanity. You have to go through with this, or you're going to look bad in front of all the other gods, essentially. And then the fifth reading we're starting chapter 10 now. And the fifth reading goes chapter 10, the first 5 verses, 1 through 5. Somebody want to do that?
I can keep going. At that time, the Lord said to me, carve for yourself tombstone tablets like the first ones, and ascend to me into the mountain, and make a wooden ark for yourself. And I shall inscribe on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets that you smashed, and you shall place them in the ark. So I made an ark of cedar wood, and I carved out 2 stone tablets like the first ones. Then I ascended the mountain with the 2 tablets in my hand. He inscribed on the tablets, according to the first script, the 10 statements that the Lord spoke to you on the mountain from the midst of the fire on the day of the congregation, and the Lord gave them to me. I turned and ascended from the mountain, and I placed the tablet in the ark that I made, and they remained there as the Lord had commanded me.
So this is a little bit different than the Exodus story, because this time, Moses has to make his own tablets. The first time around, he goes up on Mount Sinai, and God gives him tablets that God has inscribed. Now, he has to carve his own tablets and take them up there. So it's a little bit different with this. And also, it's another 40 days and 40 nights. So, that's a third 40 days and 40 nights. So if you put this all together, it's 120 days and 120 nights. And there's actually a legend of the Talmud that's symbolic of the 120 years of Moses' lifespan. He was allowed to live 120 years because of 120 days that he spent, with this episode, getting the first tablets for 40 days, arguing with God, to spare his people, for 40 days, and then getting the second set of tablets for another 40 days. So he was busy. The other thing is the detail here. There was no ark in the Exodus story, because the ark is not made till later on. It's not till months after the episode at Sinai that God gives Moses all the instructions for building the tabernacle, which includes the ark. And so here you have a different version of the story. Moses built an ark on his own for the tablets. The rabbis always tried to find some way to harmonize everything. Rashi's commentary is, well, Moses just made a temporary ark. It wasn't the real ark that was built later. This was just a temporary ark to hold everything until the tabernacle was built, and then they built the real permanent ark, and they transferred the tablets to the permanent ark. And then, see, the sixth reading is another short section of the sixth reading, which goes just from verse 6 to verse 8. Someone want to read that?
I'll do that. From Baroth ben Jachin, the Israelites marched to Mosera. Aaron died there.
Wait a minute, Harold. Wait, that's not what I have here. Oh, wait a minute, you're right. No, okay, go ahead. You're right. I made a mistake. Hey.
Okay. I mean, Aaron died there and was buried there, and his son Eleazar became priest in his stead. From there, they marched to Gudgod, and from Gudgod to Jopbath, a region of running brooks. At that time, the Lord set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of the Lord's covenant, to stand in attendance upon the Lord, and to bless his name, as is still the case. That is why the Levites have received no hereditary portion along with their kinsmen. The Lord is their portion, as the Lord your God spoke concerning them.
Yeah, so this again is reiterating. This is another repeat of Exodus, the special status of the Levites. And here you have kind of a debatable thing, why the tribe of Levi was chosen to have the priesthood and to be the people that kept the sanctuary and later on the temple. Because if you remember, Levi was not exactly Jacob's favorite son. When at the end of Genesis, when the last chapter, when Jacob is dying and he gives his final words, his final prophecies to the fate of his sons. Um, he says Shimon and Levi, his second and third sons, he pretty much curses them. You remember the episode when his daughter Dinah is raped, and the two brothers avenge this, by wiping out, this entire town, of Hittites. And Jacob pretty much curses them, saying, you could have gotten us all killed doing this. And so then you have to ask, is being a Levite a blessing or a curse? On one hand, it looks like it's a prestigious job. There's no question. There's a lot of prestige involved in being a priest and running the show in the temple. But on the other hand, they have no land of their own. And land really was the basic part of the economy. Your net worth in those days essentially was the land that you had. That was the most important thing that you owned. And they're not going to have any land, which means basically they have no means to support themselves, and which means they're going to really be dependent on the charity of the other 11 tribes. And you see over and over again in the Torah, when you give your tithes, when you bring in your stuff from your fields, you have to remember to tithe and set aside something for the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and the Levite. So in this case, they're really at the bottom of society. They're being ranked with the most helpless and marginalized people in society, orphans, widows, strangers. And so it's kind of a love-hate kind of thing. One side, it's a really great thing to be a Levi, prestige-wise, but as far as the way that you live, you're really at the bottom of the food chain in a sense. You have no land, you're dependent on the charity of the rest of the Israelites. So it's not really clear whether the Levites were being blessed or cursed, but by being given this special status. And then actually, the Shabbos Torah reading actually ends here, but the Parsha is, we're only reading of a triennial cycle, and the Parsha as a whole really goes on to the end of chapter 10. So if somebody wants to go ahead and read over to the end of chapter 10.
Sure. As for me, I stood on the mountain as on the first days, 40 days and 40 nights, and the Lord heard me that time too. He did not want to bring ruin upon you, and the Lord said to me, Rise, go upon the journey before the people, that they may come and take hold of the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you, but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, and to worship the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your being, to keep the Lord's commands and his statutes that I charge you today for your own good. Look, the Lord your gods are the heavens, and the heavens beyond the heavens, the earth and all that is in it. Only your fathers did the Lord desire to love them, and he chose their seed after them. Chose you from all the peoples as on this day, and you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart, nor shall you show a stiff neck any more. For the Lord your God, he is the God of gods and the master of masters, the great and mighty and fearsome God, who shows no favor and takes no bribe, doing justice for orphan and widow, and loving the sojourner to give him bread and cloak. And you shall love the sojourner, for sojourners you were in the land of Egypt. The Lord your God you shall fear, him you shall worship, and to him you shall cleave, and in his name you shall swear. He is your praise, and he is your God, who did with you these great and fearsome things that your eyes have seen. With 70 persons did your father go down to Egypt, and now the Lord your God has set you like the stars of the heavens for a multitude.
So again, this comes back to the basic theme of the chosen people. And regardless of how bad they are, they're still the chosen people. And there are there raises a lot of questions. The whole idea of the chosen people, what it means, is still a very controversial thing in modern Judaism. For instance, if you've ever been to a Reconstructionist synagogue, the founder of the Reconstructionist movement, Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan, really hated the whole idea. He said, that it really made us look chauvinistic and made us look like we were above the rest of mankind. It only engendered resentment in other people, and nobody really knows exactly what we're chosen for anyway. And so, if you look at in the Reconstructionist synagogue, the Siddur has cut out all mention at all references in the synagogue liturgy to chosenness. For instance, whenever you're called up for an aliyah to the Torah during the Torah service, the blessing that you recite is Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim. He who has chosen us from all peoples. And the Reconstruction has just cut that out of the Siddur. They believe that it's not proper to say that anymore. And with most Jews today, if you ask them, what does mean to be chosen people, the answer you'll get is either he should have chosen somebody else, or else chosen for what. But deep down, really, I think there are a lot of Jews do really believe that there is something special about being a Jew. And even if they can't really define it exactly, and even though they realize there are plenty of good moral people in the world outside of Judaism, they still think there's really something special about being Jewish, even if they can't exactly define what it is. And I think it's part of what makes up really the basis of Jewish identity. Even people who I think kind of tend to deny it, if you ask them, you really think you're chosen, they'll say no. But deep down, I think most Jews really have that feeling to some degree, whether they really will admit it or not. Although there are some radicals who really believe that, given our history, maybe God hasn't kept up his end of the bargain either. There's one very well-known poem in Israel that was written by an Israeli poet right after the Holocaust, and it starts off, on Sinai we were given the Torah, at Auschwitz we gave it back. That was her reaction to the Holocaust. So
That's kind of tough.
yeah, it is. But there are Jews after the Holocaust who really felt that way. That granted, we're only human and we break the covenant in many ways all the time. We never measure up, to what we should be. But on God's side, you think he could do better, being God. So there's also the question that a lot of modern theologians kick around. The chosenness was really Abraham. Abraham was really the person God chose. Everybody else gets this chosen status simply by being a descendant of Abraham. The chosenness, goes down through all the descendants of Abraham. all who join with him. And so, did God choose Abraham because he saw something special in Abraham? If I'm going to choose some human being, this human being, Abraham, is the one I want because of some special qualities he has, or was it the other way around? Did Abraham choose God? Was Abraham the first human being to have a vision of a non-corporeal, God, a transcendent God, who had no form, had no human form at all, who had no human characteristics, and he was the one who created, in a sense, recognized God. Um, and it's an argument that still goes on now. One of the great Jewish theologians of the 20th century was Abraham Joshua Heschel, and his first real bestseller was a book that he wrote called "God in Search of Man." The idea that God was looking for someone who he could present himself to, in a sense, and who could recognize the idea of God. And he sort of stumbled across Abraham. Well, you can also make the argument the other way. I think it makes just as much sense the other way. You probably everybody in Sunday school gets told this story about, Abraham's father supposedly was an idol maker, had an idol shop. And Abraham, one day the father was away doing something and came back and found that Abraham had smashed all the idols. And the father says, what did you do that for? And he says, well, I don't, why did they let me do it? Aren't they gods? Why couldn't they defend themselves? Why did they let me break them? These are gods. And, so which is taken the fact that it was Abraham who first realized, that the work of your own hands can't be worshipped and there has to be a transcendent God. So this is the Abraham chose God, side of the argument.
Very cool.
Yeah. But this is something that gets repeated over and over again in Deuteronomy. Israel keeps on sinning. God keeps his end of the covenant up anyway, and you see it all through the prophets. Israel sins over and over again, and God, punishes them and then forgives them, and you start the cycle again. Which really which brings up another question: is there really such thing as moral progress? Is this going to be the pattern forever? Israel sins, God punishes them. Israel repents, God takes them back. Israel sins again, start the cycle again. And, I think we talked about this before when we were talking about the Jewish philosophers. This is really the big difference between Greek and Jewish philosophy. The Greeks really believe that history was cyclical, that there really is no such thing as progress, at least in the moral sense. As you go through history, the only thing that really changes are the costumes and the technology. The human nature doesn't. And so, you can argue that we're much better off than our great grandparents are. We live longer, healthier, safer, more comfortable lives, more interesting lives. But are we really any better morally, than our great grandparents were? And, that would be the Greek view. The Jewish view really is that even though it's hard for us to appreciate in our short lifespans, there really is such thing as moral progress. Yeah, I think that actually the person who summed it up best, the famous saying of Martin Luther King, when he said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. It's not a circle. It's a curve, and it's very slow, but it does bend toward justice. And I think you can make the argument the other way. There are a lot of things that were routine in the ancient world that our society no longer tolerates. Slavery, torture of criminals, the gladiatorial games, that were popular entertainment in Rome. In some ways, we have made moral progress. A lot of things which were just common, are taken for granted in the ancient world, even when they're done in our time, are considered, outside, outside the moral zone. The things we no longer consider acceptable anymore, which were perfectly acceptable to our ancestors. So you can make the other side of the argument that it's not a circle; it's an arc that's heading somewhere. We are maybe as a society, maybe, as individuals, that's another deal. But you can argue that as a society, we are better than our ancestors, at least in some ways. Anybody have any other comments on this?
I want to say I do, but it's not thought out, so I'm going to keep it to myself until I can think about this one.
That's okay. Throw it out, and we'll criticize it.
We'll come back to you, Chris.
Thanks, sir.
I think that's part of the reason why it's so difficult for many of us to see how the war in Israel is progressing, because it reminds me of when the Jews insisted that they had to have a king, and all they got for their pains was a lot of grief. And I almost feel as if we're back there. We wanted a country, and we end up being just like everybody else, and the rest of the world thinks we shouldn't be like everybody else.
Yeah. Well, that's part of Zionist history. We don't think of Jews as being anti-Zionists, but in the first years of the Zionist movement, the late 19th century, the first few decades of the 20th century, there were a lot of very strongly anti-Zionist Jews who really felt the whole Zionist project was a mistake. For a variety of reasons. One is, every nation state has to do nasty things to protect itself, even the best of them. And if you have a nation state, you're going to end up having to do bad things to survive. That's just part of being a nation state. The other is, that you're going to set this down in the middle of a sea of hostile Arabs who will never accept you. And it's just going to be an ongoing siege. You'll never be at peace with your neighbors. It will always be a state of either overt war or, waiting for the next war. And you're never going to be comfortable. You're never going to be at home in this country. And these were valid arguments. They lost out. Obviously the pro-Zionists won, and we have a state of Israel. Yeah, but you're right. When you get to a situation like this, it really illustrates the arguments of the anti-Zionists, back in the early days, of the state. Chris, are you ready to announce your thoughts?
Well, it was about the morality issue. And you kind of like hit me from the side at the end, but it's like, can a people actually be moral, or is it like, are individuals moral? I guess, I mean, like, what's the basis of morality? Is it the individual, or is it this is society? And how do you judge that? I don't know. I'm still thinking.
No, it's a good question because you can argue. I think as a society, I think we're a much better society than our great 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 grandparents are as a society. We no longer tolerate slavery. We no longer tolerate abuse of women. We no longer tolerate a lot of things that our great 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 grandfathers, just thought about as being that's life. Whether as individuals. I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think personally that I'm a more moral person than my father was, or that my grandfather was. I don't know my ancestors further back than that, but I can't really say for sure that I'm a better person as an individual person than any of them were. And so I think really that's the reason why the rabbis really looked at the prophets especially, looked at the covenant as being with Israel as a people and not with individual Israelites. One of the questions whenever I teach the prophets at Ollie, and Christians often ask this because Christians really are more into the idea of individual salvation, than Judaism is. Why did Jerusalem have to be destroyed by the Babylonians, the people taken into exile? I mean, there must have been some righteous people in Jerusalem. Why did everybody have to be punished? But it's this idea, that Israel stands or falls as a people. And you see it in the Yom Kippur service. All the confessional prayers are in first person plural, not singular. It's not I did this and I did that. It's we did this, we did that. And you're confessing to stuff that you never did. But basically it's a communal confession. The community is confessing, not individuals. Which I think is a better idea because we can make society better. I think it's much harder to make yourself better as an individual. I mean, obviously you can try, but I think, each individual is kind of responsible for making himself a better individual. There's not much I can do to make you better or you make me better. I don't think. But together we can try to make society better, which is probably a more practical, maybe kind of project. I think that's where the rabbis really thought of
Are you
it and
trying to
really.
say Judaism is communal and Christianity went to individualistic?
Yeah, it is. I mean, if you talk to a lot of Christians, basically, if you accept Jesus as your personal savior, if you accept his sacrifice for you, and you're born again in Christ, you can be saved. Maybe the rest of your family won't be saved, and maybe you live in a corrupt society, and none of them will be saved. I know a lot of Baptists are, used to try to convert us when I was growing up. They believe that everybody was going to hell except for a small group of Baptists, who had been born again. So yeah, they
Yeah,
do have
I've
this
met
idea.
those people. Many a
Yeah, you can be a righteous person, and everybody around you is really going straight to hell, but you can be saved. And Judaism never really got into that individual salvation kind of way of looking at it. Um, and again, one way of looking at it is that in a really complex kind of commercial society like we live in, is anybody going to come out of it with really clean hands? I mean, they're the people that do the evil. They're the people that enable those to do the evil. There are people, I think, like most of us, that either wittingly or unwittingly, benefit in some way from the evil. There are those that could do something about the evil, but don't for a variety of reasons. And there are those that just don't want to see it, just don't want to be bothered and ignore it totally. And there are different degrees of responsibility within these different people, but you can argue that nobody really has totally clean hands. That's a theory why, back in the Greco-Roman period, there was one group of Jews who just kind of gave up on society in general. And these were, and, moved out to the desert to live, by themselves. These were the Essenes. And, we don't know exactly what the reasons were for the Essenes leaving, but most rabbis felt that they really believed that society was just irredeemably corrupt. There was no way they could live in that society without being corrupted themselves. And so they just moved out to these caves in the desert around the Dead Sea, where they could just live with a few other people, like-minded people, and be away from the corruptions of society. The Christian monastic movement was kind of the same thing. The idea is that society is just irretrievably corrupt, and rather than trying to do something to improve it, you may be just better off just ditching it and moving out, into the woods by yourself, maybe with a few like-minded people. So, uh, anybody have any other comments on this section? Okay. Well, okay, we won't have class next Tuesday, but we will Tuesday after next. And for anybody who wants to read ahead, the Torah reading for the Shabbos following that Tuesday, again, we're still in Deuteronomy, and it starts with chapter 18, verse 6.
Okie dokie.
Sounds good.
Right. Thanks.
Chris,
Harold.
y'all will need to come down the mountain eventually and get you new key fobs.
Oh, they're new key fobs?
Yeah, we're not putting them out yet, but yeah, they're coming out in about maybe 3 weeks. We're running the new security system through the paces.
Aha. Okay. Well, let us know.
Yep.
We'll make a trip.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. See you guys in 2 weeks.
All right.
All
Have a
right.
good
Be
have a good
safe,
trip.
Fred.
Okay.